Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Heritage Live. My name is Joelle Wyminga, and I'm the Operations Coordinator here at Mackin House. Before we begin, I just want to tell everybody that we will be doing a little question and answer after the Heritage Live is done. So if you have any questions, feel free to throw them up in the comments on Facebook if you're watching on Facebook Live, or if you're joining in from the Zoom, you can put them in. There's a little question and answer button down at the bottom that you can click, and you can send those to me. I'll be watching both of those things, writing all of your questions down, and we can give them to Jasmine once she's done. That's everything for me. So without any further ado, I will hand it over to Jasmine Moore, one of our curators here, and she will begin our Heritage Live, keep on trucking, and tell you all about the toy trucks that we have. Hope you all enjoy.
Hello, I am Jasmine. I'm the Heritage Manager here for Coquitlam Heritage at Mackin House. With me today is my wonderful, talented assistant, Mr. Miguel Ferreira, otherwise known as Miggy. So hi, Miggy. Thank you for your help today. Welcome to our Heritage Live. As you might already know, Coquitlam Heritage is very lucky to house a unique collection of toys that Canadians might have played with over the last century. So we will be looking at trucks today. So vroom vroom, or rather, I should say, beep, beep, beep. So first of all, what makes a truck a truck? We're gonna look at this first example here. So a truck has a chassis, which is the lower part here that houses everything. It also has a cab, an area to place cargo or equipment, axles on the bottom, usually an engine and a drivetrain, which connects the steering wheel to the rest of the wheel so you can turn them. Trucks are usually designed to carry freight or goods. Many can also tow a trailer behind them. Sorry, I should bring it back, right? Wagon companies designed some of the first trucks, and usually the engine was actually placed at the back of the wagon, and that's how it would be powered. So air-filled tires were introduced after World War I. Before this, they usually were made from solid rubber. After World War II, horse-drawn vehicles were no longer used, and trucks that were the dominant form of transportation. As time went on and more highways were built, semi-trucks became more popular for transportation of goods because it allowed for direct transport of goods from, a factory to the client. So a semi-truck may have a cab directly over the engine, beside the engine, or behind the engine, depending on how much space is required. So with that, let's continue on with our toys. We're going to look at all kinds of hardworking trucks today. We're looking at dump trucks, construction vehicles like cranes, delivery trucks, and even fire trucks. So we have examples of each in cast iron, pressed steel, tin lithograph, and die cast. So let's talk about toy types first. So right here we have an example of a die cast fire engine. This particular piece dates to 1917. So cast iron toys are made by pouring molten metal into sand cast. And usually the shapes are done in two parts and then they're riveted together. You can see we have a seam just along the front here. So one way of identifying the age of a cast iron toy, sorry, is to look at the surface of the toy. So if it's really, really smooth, that usually indicates that it's made from a newer cast, or an older cast, sorry, so, but newer for the cast. And if it is a rougher surface, that means that that cast has been used multiple times, and so it kind of wears out every time you pour new metal into it. Cast iron toys are often quite brittle. They're quite heavy, but they can break quite easily. And you'll also notice a lot of the time that they used an oil-based paint, so there will be a lot of chips over the surface of a toy as well. Because when you're playing, you usually knock your toys together, and then that results in little pieces of paint chipping off. So the next type of steel toy is a pressed steel toy. And we have this example here from 1917. And this actually incorporates this guy here is cast iron, but the rest of the body is pressed steel. So you can see he lifts up and down. So in the early 1900s, refinements to metal production created more durable metal called steel. Steel provided malleability, was stronger than cast iron, and was less likely to rust or crack. The metal was a lot easier to work with, so the toys usually lasted quite a bit longer. So we get large sheets of thin steel were pressed and curved into angle forms using heavy die. Pressed steel cars are unique and they take quite a lot of skill to manufacture. A trained die press craftsman would know exactly where to cut a large piece of steel to identify specific points of stress or tear, and it required a lot of skill to do this. By the 1920s, this method was downsized from creating large cars to creating toy cars, which allowed kids to play with something that was a little bit more durable and realistic looking. So pressed steel toys are made by pressing thick sheets of steel between two metal dies that have been tooled to a specific shape. So this, transport truck has three pieces of steel that it's been created from. So a lot of the time, automobile manufacturers enlisted the help of their already skilled craftsmen to create smaller versions of the cars and trucks that they were making. The toys produced by this method are quite sturdy, and they are able to sustain the trials and tribulations of hours and hours of childhood play, usually in a sandbox. Some common names for toys made this way are Buddy L, Tonka, Sturdy Toy, Keystone, Nylint, Corcor, along with many others. So our next example is a tin lithographed toy. So we have this tin lithograph sturdy construction crane. And these are usually typical of the mid 20th century. A tin toy or a tin lithograph toy is made out of tin plate, which is quite a lot lighter than steel is. And they use a process called chromolithography to adhere the images to the tin. So they're usually laid out in sheets, and then they have the images kind of pressed onto them, and then they're cut and bent into the particular shapes. We're going to talk more about that in future Heritage Lives. So the last type is die cast. And now most cars that we find today, cars and trucks, are usually made from this method. And again, it is a molten metal that is poured into a mold. And the thing with the die cast is that it actually allows to create a lot more detail on a piece. As you can see, this particular front end loader has multiple parts, and there's just a lot more detail when compared to the cast iron fire engine. So this method came into be around the 1940s. Almost anything can be produced by this method. The most common die cast models are usually planes, cars, military vehicles, construction equipment, and trains. And they're usually a bit lighter and have a lot more detail. And we're gonna post some links with this video so you can see how a die cast car is made. And there will be other opportunities to learn more. So with that, we're gonna move into construction vehicles. And this is actually the first vehicle that we're gonna be talking about today. So this is a front end loader. It's a model of a construction vehicle. It dates to about 1970, and it was made by Gesha Toy Co. So we have a photo here of an advertisement from the Clark Equipment Company actually advertising this particular front end loader. So this was actually a construction vehicle that would have been used, and I think it was actually quite popular for quite a number of years, by the Clark Equipment Company. And the Clark Equipment Company is unique because they were actually one of the first companies out there to create a combustion-powered industrial truck, and they did this in 1917. So they had something very similar to the green pressed steel truck that we were looking at earlier, that they created just to use on site, and they made that around 1917. They had a lot of people visiting the factory, and they expressed interest in having some made for their own factories, and so the company made 8 that first year, and then they actually made 75 the following year in 1918. And that was the first, it was called a truck tractor. So it was one of the very first construction vehicles ever made. So that's pretty cool. This was actually made in West Germany. So Gesha Toys was originally established in Nuremberg in 1923. And Nuremberg was one of the key areas for distribution of toys in Germany. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But the company changed their name to Conrad Models in 1980. So we know that this piece is a pre-1980 piece. In the late 1940s and 1950s, Gesha began focusing on making model vehicles like wind-up tractors and trailers, just like this, colorful buses, tanks, cars, and a variety of other vehicles. At this time, the vehicles were mainly made from tin and other stamped toys. In the 1960s, they began making various toys and models for brand names like Clark Equipment Company, and they expanded into die-cast toys like this one, made from Zamac, which is actually an alloy of zinc, aluminum, magnesium, and copper. So these toys were usually heavy equipment vehicles like road graders, front loaders, like this particular piece, bulldozers, etc. So this toy was made in the 1970s in West Germany. West Germany was established May 23rd, 1949, at the end of World War II, and it ended with the reunification of Germany on October 3rd, 1990. So the West Germany was allied with the Western Bloc, part of the NATO nations, and it was part of the capitalist bloc versus the Soviet bloc, which was in the east, Eastern Germany. So that's our first vehicle. So next, we have this lovely crane here. And this dates to about 1930, and it was created by the Triang brothers. And so, so this is one of the first models actually created by the company, and they founded Triang Brothers together around 1920. William, Walter, and Arthur Lines were their name. There was a fourth brother, and he decided not to participate in the company. But the three lines make up a triangle, hence the name Triang. At their peak, they had over 40 companies worldwide, including Hornby, Meccano, and Dinky brands. The Lines Brothers was a British toy manufacturer, and at its peak in 1947, it was considered, or they at least advertised themselves, to be one of the largest toy factories in the world. So in 1971, the group was broken up and everything was sold off. So pressed steel cranes like this one were manufactured by the company from about 1930 to 1970s. This might be actually as early as 1928 to 1930. They manufactured over 200 types of cranes and trains. Ours is missing the chains and or bar to keep the boom in place though. So there's our early example. And we just, because I have to include this one, this is probably one of the larger pieces that we have in our collection. And again, this is a crane slash wrecking ball. And I believe it dates to about, or it's circa 1930. We have a logo up here on the top, and it swivels. And you can imagine that a kid would have hours and hours of fun playing with this. The roof of this particular piece is actually made from wood, and we have rubber wheels here as well. And then on the side, rotates 360. We have two cranks that would pull the ball up and down, as well as lift and lower the arm. So there is our Triang extra large crane from about 1930. You'll have to bear with us because these are obviously very large pieces, some of them, and so it takes quite a lot to load them on and off. Okay, so our next piece here, this is actually made by a Canadian company, but first we're gonna talk about what it is. So this is a steam shovel, and steam shovels were the earliest example of power shovels or excavators, and they're designed to excavate and move rocks and soil. Steam shovels shaped the infrastructure of the early 20th century and the late 19th century. They were a key to many construction efforts. They assisted in building a lot of skyscrapers that we would see popping up in places like Chicago, New York. They were also used to excavate the Panama Canal. When diesel-powered shovels entered the market in the 1930s, steam shovels really fell out of favor. They were usually built on a railway chassis, so they would have to lay a line down every time they would want to, have the shovel move back and forth. So it was quite a lot of work to get anything moved using one of these. But compared to hand, it actually made quite a huge difference. Workers would temporarily lay tracks for the shovel, and then they would have to reposition them as necessary. Later, steam shovels were actually fitted with caterpillar tracks, so if you think of a tank, and then that way they could go over the rough soil easily. Steam shovels were used around the world, in Australia, Russia, to coal mines in China. They excavated mines, created quarries. In construction and in road construction, the main components include, there's usually a steam boiler, and then this is actually the housing for it. There's a water tank, a winch, a main engine, a boom, a dipper stick, a crowd engine, wheels, and then the excavator bucket. And you can see this lifts up and down. They were usually operated by a 3-man crew, so it took 3 people to operate these. There was an engineer, a fireman that would have to keep the fire going so that, you know, the steam could power the vehicle, and a ground man to kind of direct things. So we will have a link posted to kind of see one of these in action. I was able to find a couple of videos of actual steam shovels at the time that they were being used in the late 19th, early 20th century, as well as a like a restored one being used, you know, in modern times. So this particular piece was created by Ellwood Toys, and it dates to about 1940. Ellwood Toys is a Canadian company, and you can see in the presentation, but it says Tilbury, Ontario on it. So they were originally located in Windsor, Ontario, and they relocated to Tilbury in the 1950s. Ellwood Toys and Windsor Steel manufactured toys for Lincoln Specialties, and we'll have a couple of examples of other vehicles by them later on in our presentation. Ellwood Toys began this partnership around 1953. Both Ellwood and Lincoln Toy Companies were closed in the late 1950s, so they weren't around for very long. They created oversized pressed steel trucks, cranes, and work equipment, and allowed many young children to imitate their larger counterparts during playtime. So that is our first steam shovel. And we're going to move on to our next one. This is also by a Canadian company. And this is by it's called Richard's Toys, and it's out of Longueuil, Quebec. And this particular piece dates to 1940 as well. It's a pressed steel toy again. It features a cylinder steam engine, so you can actually see the engine on this piece. And it has a pulley system with a crank on the side. And truly Canadian toys were quite rare during this time period, that being one that was actually designed, built in Canada and distributed in Canada. And I believe that this is actually a copy of a design from a Steelcraft toy. And you can see up here, this is an ad from Steelcraft, and we have a, it's almost identical. And this was kind of a common practice back then, before, you know, copyright and patent law was really, people would fight it pretty hard. And also sometimes they would sell the rights to create certain pieces by other companies. We have actually an example of another toy that was designed by an American company, but it was produced in Canada. So this may be one of those situations, but I wasn't really able to find very much on Richard's Toys. So if anybody has some information, I would be very interested in adding that to our catalog records. There is that one. And our next example will look very familiar because we were talking about it earlier. So this is a tin lithograph crane, steam shovel. This is a later model of a steam shovel. And this is dates to about 1950. So I'm including this as it's an example from Wyandotte Toys, and we actually have quite a few Wyandotte Toys in our collection. And it's one of the most popular toy companies of the last century. It's also, they operated in Michigan from 1921 to 1947. They're also known as the All Metal Products Company. They manufactured millions of toys across the globe. Beginning in 1921, they focused on toy guns. They were the largest manufacturer of toy guns across the world at this time. Their slogan was, "Every boy wants a pop gun." They later changed their motto to "Wyandotte Toys are good and safe." And I think there probably was some issues around that at some point. So early on, they manufactured really simple Art Deco steel cars and trucks, and we're going to have some examples of the steel cars in our next presentation, so keep your eye out for that. They moved on to heavier gauge steel cars. They were usually distinguished with a baked enamel finish, and that allowed the toys to kind of withstand more play. Post-war sales soared with an incoming baby boom. They reached 8 million in 1948. A change in management in the 1950s led to a drop in their sales. In the 1950s, toys began to be manufactured in plastic because they were attempting to, compete with dime stores and basement bargain markets. Eventually, the company sold a portion of its product line to, including the Hafner trains, which we will talk about in our December Heritage Live, Beyond the Polar Express, to its competitor, the Lewis Marx and Company. So we actually have some examples of Lewis Marx, and we'll talk more about that coming up. The final closure of the remaining Wyandotte plant was in 1955, and the company went bankrupt, unfortunately, in 1957. So toys made before 1947 are usually really simple in construction. Unlike this one is quite complicated. There are several parts to it, and they usually featured bright colors such as red, yellow, silver, and olive green. Post-war toys are very easily distinguishable because of their detailed lithograph prints and the thinner metal that they used, usually resulting in a lighter product. So I do believe this arm here is actually made from pressed steel, where the rest is made from tin. So there is our last example of a construction vehicle. So now we're going to move on to dump trucks. So here we have another familiar looking dump truck. So a little bit about dump trucks first. They're also known as dumper trucks or tipper trucks. They will transport sand, gravel, demolition waste, construction material, or coal. The box is usually open-ended, or it will have a flap here on the end, allowing for material to be dumped. And the first dump trucks came to be in the 1800s in Western Europe and in the United States around 1910, they believe. During World War I, there was a high demand for vehicles like this. And the first Canadian dump truck was actually reported to have been built in New Brunswick around 1920. So this particular piece, it dates to 1917, and it was developed by Kingsbury Toys, and they were based out of Keene, New Hampshire. The company was founded by James S. Wilkins around 1890. By the turn of the century, toy automobiles had been kind of introduced, and they were very popular. Early Wilkins automotive toys were equipped with specially designed disc wheels. And for a little bit of extra money, you could actually get them in rubber. These ones here are made from steel. Automotive models could be purchased with also metal spoke wheels if you wanted. In 1919, Kingsbury changed the company name to Kingsbury Manufacturing Company. And usually when toy companies, change their name, it's because they're branching out. Either, they might have been a metal production company and then they've added toys to their repertoire, or, they were a toy company and now they're getting into other metal products. So we'll talk more about that later. By 1926, Kingsbury introduced a new line of metal mechanical toys, and they continued to manufacture toys until the beginning of World War II. After the war, their tooling, so their dies, etc., was actually sold to Keystone Manufacturing Company of Boston, Massachusetts. And we will talk about Keystone, I think, a couple times later in our presentation. So there's our first dump truck. So our next one is another big, hefty machine. So this particular piece, that fits in the shot. This is a Buddy L pressed steel dump truck. It dates to about 1920. So it is apparently a rare model. It has a crank with a chain to pull, raise and lower the truck bed here. So other company names for Buddy L include Moline Pressed Steel, Buddy L, and then they also had a couple of other names because they made some wood toys as well. We will be posting more company information on our blog, so keep your eye peeled for that if you're interested. So the story behind the name Buddy L is that Mr. Fred A. Lundahl he worked for Moline Press Steel, and they actually produced auto parts for the International Harvester Truck company, and they produced other automotive body parts for cars. And he wanted to build a car for his son that, you know, would withstand the abuses of the sandbox. And so he decided that he was going to make a, you know, miniature model of the International Harvester Truck. So he used 18 to 20 gauge steel to do this, which was discarded scrap metal from his factory. And the name Arthur at the time was really popular. There was several Arthurs living on Mr. Lundell's street. And so his son was distinguished as Buddy Lundell instead of Arthur. And so that's where the name Buddy L comes from. And they made toy cars, dump trucks like this one, delivery vans, fire engines. We'll have fire engines to show you later. So stay tuned for that. Construction equipment and trains. They were marketed as toys for boys. A child could sometimes straddle these vehicles and propel themselves with their feet. They also made a line of pull vehicles, so a kid could pull it behind him. So we will have an example of one of those to show you later. Mr. Lundell persuaded FAO Swartz and Marshall Fields to carry his toy line, and he sold his company during the Great Depression. Many of the toys, like this one, have a baked enamel finish, and it helps to extend the life of the toy and prevent it from rusting. So we're gonna also have some links down below to some advertisements from Buddy L from about the 1960s. So that would have been post Mr. Lundell, but you know, it's still cool to see. I like old ads. I'm not sure about you, but they make me happy. Got that? Thank you. So this is our next toy. Oh, just one moment. Take a picture. Okay. So this is a Packard dump truck, again from about 1920. And it is a press steel Dayton car. So do you know when you pull back on a car and you let it go and the engine starts to whir and it just seems to move on its own? Well, that's actually a very complicated, in some cases, system that is usually found on the underside of a car. And in the early 1900s, there was actually 38 companies operating out of Dayton, Ohio that had access to the patent for this kind of technology. And so these kinds of cars that date to that time period are usually called Dayton cars. This particular dump truck is a Packard dump truck. So that refers to the Packard company, which, you know, produced a very distinctive truck body. This piece is associated with the Schieble Toy Company, and you may or may not be able to see maybe in the presentation, but it actually has Schieble written on the wheels. And Schieble is an offset of the D.P. Clark and Company, and they were in operation from 1897 to 1909. And at one point, Mr. Schieble was originally partners with D.P. Clark and Co., but there was a disagreement and Mr. Schieble bought out Mr. Clark. And so the company name changed to Schieble Toys in 1909, and the company continued to produce toys until about 1931 when they closed, unfortunately, due to bankruptcy. So there is our Packard pressed steel Dayton truck. Okay. And this is our next truck here. And this is a Wyandotte Dump Truck. Oh, I missed that one. There we go. So this particular dump truck dates to about 1930. And as I was saying earlier, a lot of toys were made from scrap metal from local auto factories and surplus raw material whenever possible. So it was kind of a way of, you know, capitalizing on the main mode of production for a lot of factories. So Toy guns and airplanes and trucks made before 1947 are usually quite simple in construction, and they feature bright colors such as red and green. Post-war toys are usually distinguished because of their lithograph prints, as I said earlier. This is an early example, actually, of tin lithography as well. If you look at the front end, it says Wyandotte Toys on the bottom, and the lithography actually allows them to create detail that they probably wouldn't have been able to create otherwise. So there we go. And this is actually a unique piece because it is a side dumper. So it goes like that. You lift this and then you dump out of the side. So that's, one of the only side dumpers that we have in our collection. So there we go. Okay, and back to this. So you remember the home of the largest toy factory in the world, Triang Toys. So this Triang dump truck dates from 1947 to 1955, and it is probably one of the most pristine models that we have in our collection. It's in incredible shape. There's very little rust on this piece, and this is known as the 201 lorry. These trucks were, which is another name for truck, if you didn't know. These trucks were made just after the war, the earliest appearing in 1947. They featured the very square cab. So this would actually be an example of a cab where the cab sits right over the engine versus being in front, because then you would have that bulbous part on the front end of the vehicle. There were 5 different lorries in this series. There was a transport van, 2 builders lorries, a gas tanker, and a mobile crane. So the very distinctive coloring with the teal and the red, and you can see very prominently right here, they have the Triang logo. So, and also on the tires as well, it says made in England, Triang Brothers. So there is our 1947 Triang Brothers lorry. Okay, moving on. So as I said earlier, we were going to talk about the Marx Brothers, and this is a Marx Brothers dump truck with shovel, which is pretty cool, and it dates to about 1940. So we have a very similar model from Wyandotte as well, but this is a different company. So Louis Marx founded this company in 1919. They were able to survive the Depression. They even expanded their business holdings during this time. During the 1950s, they became one of the largest toy manufacturing companies in the world. He appeared on the cover during this time of Time magazine, in 1955 as the Toy King. So he was called this by a London newspaper in 1937. Another person called him the Henry Ford of the toy industry, and he was inducted into the Toy Industry Hall of Fame later in life. The company folded actually in 1980, just shortly before Marx's death in 1982, but it had been sold over to actually Quaker Oats of all companies in 1972, just before he had retired from the business. So their slogan was, one of the many Marx toys, have you all of them? And the company was first founded, their goal was to give the customer more toy for less money, while quality was non-negotiable. So a lot of tin toys from the 1950s and onwards are usually made by the Marx company, and we'll actually explore a lot more of those in future episodes or Heritage Lives. So keep your eye peeled for that. They were very successful at predicting upcoming hit toys and making them cheap. One example is the yo-yo. So they're often credited with the invention of the yo-yo, but they actually were just very successful in their line of yo-yos, which sold over 100 million in the 1920s. They were actually called the Lumar line, and if you look at the side of this vehicle, it says Lumar Contractors on it, and they often, would repurpose the name, like Sturdy Construction Co. on the Wyandotte crane that we just saw. That name would appear on multiple vehicles, so like Sturdy Construction vehicles, whereas Lumar Contractors appeared usually on Marx Brothers toys. So one of the other popular toys often associated with the Marx Brothers is the Rock'em Sock'em robots. If you grew up in the 1980s, you would remember those. Also the big wheel tricycle which was first introduced in 1969, and I'm pretty sure it's in the Toy Hall of Fame as well. They produced dime store toys along with larger, more expensive toys and items for department stores like Eaton, Sears, JCPenney, etc. At one point, there were factories creating Marx toys all across the world. In 1955, 55% of Marx toys were actually made in Japan, and we will talk a little bit more later about post-war production in Japan. The plant in Erie was actually the oldest and largest of these factories. So here we have our 1940 Marx dump truck, and I actually was able to find, oh, that's different. This is for the next one, never mind. I was looking for an ad for it, but I wasn't able to find one. So this has the thing that lifts up. And one thing that will tell you if a truck is usually older is if it has the bumper fender, sorry, not bumper. The fender is cut from a separate piece of metal, and then it is here to the front with tabs. So, go. And next, we have our Wyandotte dump truck, and you'll notice very similar model to the last one. And again, it has the shovel, and that's the one I was able to find the advertisement for. So if you look in the top corner here, we have this, excuse me, very dump truck featured on a page from a catalog. And there's actually another example of a side dumper there too. So that's pretty cool. So again, this piece is a little bit later. It's probably 1950, and it has the tin litho cab here, and the tin litho front end, which is quite different from the previous model. And one thing to note too is that a lot of toy companies would often repurpose the cabs of their trucks. So you could usually identify a truck company by the shape of the cab. So this cab will actually appear in a later toy as well. So keep your eye out for that. There you go. Okay. And our last dump truck we're going to talk about today is this lovely example of a Tonka truck from the 1970s. And this one was actually purchased at a local store. So that's really cool. That makes me very excited when we come across something that has more local provenance in our toy collection. So this is a die-cast toy. So it has, a lot more detail on it that's not been printed on, but it's actually formed as a part of the vehicle itself. Mound Metal Craft was actually the original name for Tonka Toys. And it was founded by Lynn Everett Baker, Avery F. Krauts, Albin F. Tetch in the basement of a Minnesota schoolhouse in 1946. They were first making metal tie racks and garden tools. As many people entering the toy industry at this time, they had hopes to capitalize on all the available scrap metal in the post-war period. In 1947, they purchased a competing company, and they actually inherited a steam shovel with the building. They tinkered with the shovel, and they began to create some pressed steel toys of their own, which is pretty cool. Some report that the name Tonka comes from Lake Minnetonka, which was located nearby the schoolhouse. Or alternatively, it actually is a reiteration of the word tanka, which means big in Sioux. While the tie racks did not take off, their toy trucks certainly did. They sold 37,000 units in their first year of business, so that's quite impressive. In 1955, they changed their name to Tonka Trucks Incorporated, and these trucks were made from automotive grade 20 gauge steel, so they're quite hefty. And today, most Tonka trucks are usually construction themed or dump truck themed. Trucks like these allow kids' minds to kind of run wild, which is one of the key appealing factors of them. And they can reenact things that they see in the outside world. My own son is absolutely fascinated with large construction vehicles. And he has his own Tonka truck. It is a dump truck, or not a dump truck, a tow truck. And he loves, he's only 17 months, but he plays with it everywhere in our house. So the company was purchased by Hasbro in 1991, and they continue to produce the sturdy vehicles that provide children hours of entertainment today. So this particular vehicle, here's an ad for some Tonka trucks from the 1970s. So again, you know, usually trucks from the time period will mirror the body of trucks being sold at that time, or they might be like a reproduction, you know, trying to recapture some nostalgia. So here's an ad. I'm also going to post some links to some famous Tonka ads, one of which refers to, you know, and they're so strong an elephant can stand on them without breaking. So that's quite impressive. But anyway, this truck, sorry, Miggy, this truck was purchased at Trevs store. So this is actually an early photo from Trevs store, and I got this from the City of Coquitlam Archives. Thank you, Emily. And here's a later iteration of the store, and it was actually neighbor to us here on Brunette. It was located at 1121 Brunette Avenue. It was one of the longest running businesses in Coquitlam. It started out as Philotrope's barbershop in the early 1930s, and Anne Bonahos worked there. Prothero, sorry. She was hired on there as a hairdresser. And when Mr. Philotrope quit the business, she took over and renamed it Anne's Beauty Shop. She married Trevor James Prothero in 1939, and they launched Trevs Confectionery, Trevs Fountain Lunch around the same time. Eventually, they had multiple expansions. The resulting store included a light lunch counter, a men's club, and even a kindergarten at one point. And I have a quote to read from Anne, and she said, "Our store has always been pretty well stocked. My place was just packed because there was a gift line and toys of every kind, as well as clothing and shoes. I was always able to find things for people, never stuck for something." So we were very grateful to receive this as a donation in 2016, and it actually even came with the original box. So that's pretty cool too. And it came with a another construction vehicle, which I'm not featuring. Unfortunately, we're only able to show you kind of a sample of things in our collection. So here's our Tonka truck. And we do actually have an example too of a pre-1955 Tonka truck that has the Mound Metalcraft logo on it as